Hi, everybody. Welcome to Donor Participation Project Happy Hours. Every week or so, we have a conversation with somebody really smart, and we found Tracy out in the universe, and I've been learning a lot from her um, the last few weeks. Tracy, you've joined a couple of DPP sessions, and we're super grateful. And we kind of started chatting about DAFs, and I said, "Oh my goodness, you need to share this with everybody." So I'm going to pass the baton on to Tracy. Ask her to introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself. And if anybody has questions or comments or ideas, please put them in the chat, and we'll address them as we go. And just to get started, if you could let us know where you're calling in from and what organization you're with, that would be super helpful today. So Tracy, please share a little bit about your background with us.
Okay, so my name is Tracy Malloy-Curtis, and I'm the VP of Legacy Giving at Mal Warwick Donordigital. We're a full-service integrated direct marketing firm, and about 5 years ago, I started the legacy marketing side of the business, working primarily with progressive, environmental, political nonprofits. That's my background. So for about 25 years, I've been in plan giving and major gifts, mostly on the progressive advocacy side, and moved over to the dark side of consulting a couple of years ago. And the reason we're talking about DAFs today is because I think they're completely upending fundraising, plan giving, major giving, annual giving, all of it. And I think we all need to be prepared. And so I get to share my obsession with you all today.
Oh my goodness. Well, thanks so much. We're going to learn a lot. Would you like to go straight into the slides?
Yeah, I think, you know what, we can talk, let's pull it up, and then
okay.
we need to, we can stop sharing it, but.
Okay, awesome. So, and everybody, please feel free to comment in. Tracy, I think I don't know if we're having an issue with LinkedIn today, but in any case, we're going to record this and we'll rebroadcast it if something got broken. So we may have less chat activity than usual.
Okay, no worries. Alrighty, and you see my screen okay?
Perfectly.
I need to get a second screen.
Wonderful.
All right. Yeah, I was thinking about this. I just changed it because I'm a mom and my son is a really reasonable teenager right now. And I was thinking back to his toddler days, and there was this great book called Your 3-Year-Old Friend or Foe. And so I thought it was kind of appropriate for this discussion. So, you know, as I said, I think that donor advised funds are really changing philanthropy. I think that we're not prepared. I think that there are interests in our world that are not in our best interests as charities, who are sort of dominating the conversation. And I think as charities, as people who work with donors, as donors ourselves, we actually really need to know what's going on and figure out what our plan is. Now, you know, there's a lot of back and forth. It's, you know, if you don't like donor advised funds, then you hate rich people, or donor advised funds are the best thing ever, you know, something like that. It doesn't really matter.
Privacy. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Right. I personally think that philanthropy, as I said, is not a replacement for progressive taxation, universal health care, etc. But that has been a conflict in my work ever since I started doing it. And I have to work a little bit with the reality that, you know, I live in. So this is not a pro or con donor advised fund. It's just, what is the lay of the land right now and how do we deal with it?
Okay. So adapting to reality rather than the world we wish we live in.
Yep. So, you know, I'm not going to go on a tangent on this, but one of the reasons donor advised funds are sort of dominating our industry is because our whole system is set up to allow it to. There are donor advised funds in other countries that have not taken over in the same way because their philanthropic, economic, tax systems are structured differently and structured more towards community benefit versus tax avoidance. So I'm a little cynical about whether the various DAF reforms that have been proposed, you know, in terms of payouts and so on, will succeed. I think that it's a little bit of an uphill battle. And again, I myself would advocate for those reforms. However, I'm also a little uncertain that they will happen. But that's just one of the reasons that that they've sort of dominated us right now. But I think it's important whether you love them or hate them or you don't care either way, is to know what's happening with money right now. And that is about 25% of individual dollars are now going to DAFs instead of directly to charity. And that's a lot of money, especially at a time where fundraising is down. And it's not just individual dollars that are going to DAFs. Foundations are giving money to DAFs. Foundations are rolling over into DAFs. DAFs are giving to other DAFs. So there's a lot of money floating around that is not actually coming directly to us.
Okay.
And the payout rate.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Does that mean that, is that like money being counted in things like Giving USA? Does that look like charitable activity?
Well, a donor advised fund is a charitable entity. So if you look at the top nonprofits by revenue, and I'll show you a slide actually, most of the top ones are donor advised funds, not individual charities anymore. So they're counting those charitable dollars as gifts to the DAF, because those are charitable entities and that's how they're set up. So it can be really confusing. So it shows the money that's flowing in as money that's being gifted. It does not reflect money that's coming out. And a lot of it is not coming out. The different sponsors will quote different amounts.
Sponsor? Sorry, I'm like super stupid about this.
Okay, so a donor advised fund is sponsored traditionally by a community foundation, and I'm not really talking about those here because although they are donor advised funds, community foundations are really built around giving back to the community, flowing funds back out into the community, working with donors in the community to benefit the community. Big fan of community foundations, and they're not really the issue. The big DAF sponsors that we're talking about are the corporate ones, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, the ones that are sponsored by the philanthropic arms of these entities. And more DAF money, more accounts are being started with them than with community foundations. A lot more money is flowing into them. And the incentives for them to either keep that money there or grant it out are a little bit different. So some individual charities have their own donor advised funds, some big universities, I think maybe Nature Conservancy has one, but for the most part, these are either sponsored by a financial services firm or by a community foundation.
Okay, so it's the word sponsor, but it's really like the entity that holds the funds.
Yeah. Yep. Donors have a giving account with the donor advised fund, but the donor advised fund itself is considered a charity, which is why you can get tax benefits. So when you donate money to a donor advised fund, you get the same benefits you would get if you had donated directly to an individual charity. So, however, you don't actually then have to re-grant the money out. And in fact, we call it granting because donors are really advisors. Once they open an account and they put their money into it, they don't own it anymore. The donor advised fund, that's their money. And donors recommend grants from their accounts, which more often than not, almost all the time are approved by the DAF sponsor, but ultimately that money is not theirs anymore. So that's just the sort of structure of that. The other thing that DAFs do, which is one reason they've gotten so popular, is they make it really, really easy to give assets. A lot of our organizations are really loath to accept real estate or complex assets. They think they don't have the expertise, or their finance people think the risk is too high, or their gift acceptance policies don't allow it. There's ways around that, by the way. But the reality is that donor advised funds, they make it really easy to donate those assets. And so I think right now about 60% of funds that are going into donor advised funds are asset gifts, not cash gifts. Whereas the number of sort of asset gifts going directly to charity has not really been increasing because we didn't make it easy. And that boat, I think, has probably sailed.
Okay, so it's just so much easier. Do you recommend DAFs in this specific case of trying to give a complicated asset?
It is 100% not our job to tell donors to open DAFs, and we keep doing it, and we shouldn't. I'll talk about that a little bit too, because I have an opinion on that one. But as a former major gifts officer and planned giving officer, I often worked with donors who had assets to donate, and so I would work with them to accept them. And these days, sometimes if it was an asset that our finance team wasn't comfortable accepting, we would actually work with charitable solutions, which they actually have their own donor advised fund called Decoded, that they actually will take these assets and then grant it right back out to you. So it's essentially a pass-through DAF, and that's a great opportunity for charities who want to accept these gifts directly and don't feel like they have the expertise. There's a lot of help now for organizations that it doesn't have to implicate your gift acceptance policy. It moves the risk away from you, but you can accept the gift rather than have it go somewhere else. So, but again, I think that for the most part, now donors with significant assets tend to think of their donor advised fund or even start a donor advised fund in order to gift those assets, because we've just made it too hard for too long.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're actually solving kind of a different pain point, which is just
It's
the
a big
lack
pain
of
point.
infrastructure. No, but then, and what you're saying is that the money, then that's kind of how it gets in, but then it just kind of never leaves, or leaves at
Some of it leaves.
What's the deal?
Some of it, I mean, it leaves, but there's no requirement. There's no minimum grant requirement. And, you know, look, if you're in a down market, you know, potentially you want more money to donate, you might let it sit there till the market recovers. You know, there's different reasons why you might want to let it grow over time, but it's just not as robust. If a quarter of individual giving dollars that were going to charity are now going to DAFs, and only a quarter of those are being granted out, that's a lot of money now that doesn't live in our world. And I think it was Boston University estimated $300 billion of deferred gifts over the past decade that haven't gone to charity that would have. So it's kind of a lot of money.
I mean, is this money that just wouldn't have gone to charity at all?
No, it has to go to charity. That's the thing.
Well, it has to now that it's in DAFs, but hypothetically, you know, it maybe just would be sitting in people's bank accounts? Or
no, I think they would have given it. They would have given it. So when you put money into a DAF, it's for a charitable purpose. That money is not, it's not like they're saying, should I give this to charity or should I give this to my kids? It's money that's allocated for charity, and they're flowing it through a DAF rather than directly to the charity. So that's money that would have actually gone directly to charity, and that's been kind of diverted. But, you know, the biggest problem that I think we haven't been talking about is it's not just these current dollars that are being diverted, it's the legacy dollars as well. So, you know, plan giving, legacy giving is my primary focus right now. And obviously, you know, gifts and wills and other estate plans are such a important part of many organizations' budgets. And there's a lot of money out there. We just finished a benchmarking research project, and on average, 40% of people over 50 in the US either have or are totally open to leaving a gift to charity in their will, and only 20% are not into it at all. But only about 7 or 8% ultimately do. We're losing them. We're losing that money. It's just not getting to us. And I think a fair amount of it's actually going into DAFs, because one of the features of a donor advised fund is that because it is technically a charity, you can name the donor advised fund as the charitable beneficiary of your estate. You can name your DAF as through your beneficiary designations. You can name it as the beneficiary of your charitable remainder trust. So instead of that money being distributed at death or after someone's life, it can flow right into that donor advised fund and stay there. And so that, I think, has some real implications. And again, just to, you know, there's some real reasons why money can sit there, right? Like Fidelity, 60% of their DAF account funds are invested in their own financial products, right? So, you know, they make money by having it sit there. And just so you can see, so this is just 2020, but the charity receiving the most contributions in 2020 was Fidelity, followed by National Philanthropic Trust, also a DAF.
The charity, as in all the charities in the United States, yes. If you think that that's okay.
You don't
technically
an actual charity number 4. So all of these orange ones, those are all donor advised funds. So that's for charitable money.
Wow.
Yeah. and it's not all getting granted out. So it's not just being shuffled down then to other charities. A fair amount is sitting there. But again, it's not all bad news. Again, we're not really here to say, oh, they're horrible or they're not. But and again, this is according to Vanguard. I always take it with a little grain of salt. But the longer a donor has an account, the more they give. And again, it can't be used for anything except for giving. They're not going to divert it for like a down payment on a house, right? If the market's up, they have more funds to grant. About 70% are repeat grants. So potentially if you have a relationship with a donor who gives through a donor advised fund, they're going to keep giving to you, and they give more than they would if they were just giving from income. And so, this is not all bad news. We just have to know how to work in this environment. And I think really most importantly, we all have to work together. A lot of times donor advised fund giving lives in the plan giving department, and I have no idea why. Well, I have a lot of ideas why actually, but I won't go into them because that's a whole nother discussion. But these are current gifts. These are future gifts. They implicate annual giving, major giving, mid-level giving, plan giving, all of that. And so everyone has to be at the table and have a strategy around this type of giving, and not just keep it sort of in one department or, managed by like a third-party marketing vendor or something like this. This has to be actually an organization-wide priority. And that's a challenge because we still exist in silos pretty often. And I really can't emphasize this enough.
And of course, Tracy, it's impossible to know, but how much for an average organization? I mean, how much are they missing out on just because I know I'm asking you something really hard or impossible to do, right? But because they don't have this strategy, would you say like a third of what they raise every year?
I think that if organizations did this right, they would not be seeing a drop in giving this year.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone is seeing a drop in giving this year. It's bad. I mean, everyone is really freaking out right now, right? Everyone saw the fundraising effectiveness project. Everyone's seeing it in their own charities. Fundraising is down for a bunch of years. Major gifts kind of made up for it. So we had fewer gifts, but they were bigger. And even that is drawn out now. And I think that if the organizations who come together, have a strategy and do well with this in a bunch of different ways, could really make up that money. So it's a lot.
Interesting.
So my dog is totally going to start barking now. So I think, again, I want to touch a little bit on why I think having DAF giving live in plan giving, which we're sort of historically it does, we're kind of the area where if it's not cash and no one really knows what to do with it, it kind of lands on us, right? And I will say, as a industry or we've facilitated that. We like to feel like we are the people who have the special knowledge, the higher level knowledge that we're really good at this. But the reality is that's actually been really damaging to us, again, by keeping this in silos. And so we don't find out who our DAF donors are. We don't incorporate DAFs as payment options within our broader marketing. Other departments don't know anything about it. Major gifts officers don't know which of their donors have donor advised funds. It's just, it can be a real problem. And there's some current marketing tactics and strategies that I think are contributing to this. And so again, I just want to really reiterate that getting this out of a single area of work is so, so important. It's one of the reasons I actually work at a marketing agency and not a plan giving vendor, because everything we do is incorporated into the overall fundraising and marketing for the organization. It doesn't live separately. And I think that's actually really important right now. But I think it's also worthwhile to sort of take a step back and say, like, well, why are donors loving DAFs so much? Other than the fact that they make it easier to take assets, I always want to ask, like, why do they want to put an intermediary between the charity and themselves, right? They do that because something is missing in their relationship with us, right? They don't see us as partners in their planning. Maybe they don't trust us to do with their money. Oh, there go my dogs. what they think they could do. I think that we've focused a lot on major donors and not on the rest of our file. We don't report back. I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think we have to know how we can mitigate those. That does not mean that if we figure this out and do better, that those dollars are going to now go back to us instead of the DAF. They're still going to go to the DAF. Again, that ship has sailed. But we can be successful in activating more of those funds back to us faster. And that really is our goal. But if we don't really truly understand why they find it more meaningful to give through a DAF or easier, then, you know, I think that there's an issue there, and that's something we can actually deal with.
Okay, so just let me dive into this because I find it super interesting. So do you think it's a trust issue?
Oh, it's a trust issue. So one of the things we see is that advisors and attorneys are telling people, you know, don't tell organizations you've put them in your will or your plan, because, you know, you don't know what's going to happen down the line. They could fall apart. You know, they're not very trustworthy, or, you know, don't give them a whole chunk of money when you die because they're not going to know what to do with it. There really is a trust issue. And we see that in like donor confidence surveys and all of that. Look, institutions in all institutions are not doing so well in terms of trust these days. Nonprofits have held relatively steady, but not so much anymore. And so I really do think it's a trust issue. It's a stewardship issue. It's there's a lot of reasons, actually. It's a marketing issue. Yeah, and that has implications, again, not only for our current giving, but our future giving. And, you know, one stat that, again, from our legacy benchmarking project, we've been building in questions about how are DAFs impacting your charitable estate planning. And we saw that over 30% of the people who had DAFs have named it as a charitable beneficiary of their estate. And I'm always shocked at how many plan giving people don't know that. Like they've been pretty shocked when they hear that. And that's a problem too. That means we're actually not talking to people, right? Only 30% say that they're going to distribute those funds directly to charity after their lifetime. So again, this is money. In our plan giving teams, we want people, when they die, to leave us that money. We count on it, we benchmark it, we have our pipelines. But for donors who have donor advised funds, they are much less likely to distribute that money to you directly. And so that has some, you know, both, again, it's going to have negative implications if we don't understand how to manage that. And there's some ways we can, but that was a really interesting kind of stat. And so, you know, to deal with that, like there's some things you actually have to know, like who has a donor advised fund. That is challenging, actually, because, you know, there's no list of donors to donor advised funds. However, there are more and more companies now that can do data appends and modeling that help identify likely DAF donors. Is that 100% that they do or don't? No, but it's worth doing just so you have a sense, and so you can start testing some messaging around them. If you're working directly with donors, you have to ask them if they have a DAF, if they have a succession plan, and what their plan is for it. If you're working in your gifts and you haven't had this discussion with your donors in your portfolio, you're not doing your job. I really believe that. And that's also true of anyone working face-to-face with donors. And so...
Well, and can I mention something really dumb? Also, just look at who has given from a DAF in the past. So many shops I've worked with had a lot of trouble getting that data.
They still do. It's shocking. They either did not soft credit the donor appropriately, or or they just have it under the sort of third-party gift subtype, which there's a lot of different kinds of gifts, or they sort of squash them together with qualified charitable distributions, which are very different, have to be acknowledged differently. Actually, one thing that DAF sponsors and DAF donors often say is that organizations seem really unprofessional because they don't know how to thank their DAF donors for these gifts, and they're not keeping track of it. So, for example, a lot of DAF donors, because we don't make it easy to give through their DAF, maybe they'll do credit card gifts, or they'll send a check-in, and they also have DAF gifts. And so I've seen too many organizations that they're setting up their ask strings, you know, based on recency and frequency and amount, and they're not pulling in those soft credits, or they're sending out lapsed reinstatement appeals to people who just moved their giving from credit card to DAF, and they're not picking that up. Or they're sending tax letters at the end of the year saying, thank you so much for all your charitable giving this year. And they just put the cash and stock gifts, but they don't mention anything else. And so little things like that can really damage a donor relationship. So get your data together. And get your messaging together, because, you know, not only in terms of getting those gifts now, which I have some suggestions on that, but on the plan giving side for those future dollars, I create plan giving marketing appeals. And so this is sort of front and center for me right now. What is the message to people with donor advised funds? It's not put us in your will necessarily anymore, right? It is,
They already put the DAF in
well,
the
maybe
will.
they have, maybe they haven't, but we can't just, one of the reasons it's so important to know who has a DAF, so you can build some messaging around that. But the options that they're given, people are given by the sponsors are, you know, you can set up your DAF as sort of an endowment style alternative to a foundation and just give in perpetuity. You can appoint people to keep giving after you're gone, like successor trustees. And we all know that a lot of times that's kids and grandkids, and they have their own priorities. They're not going to keep giving to you. Or you can say, well, it'll be distributed, but over 5 years or more, because again, we don't necessarily trust you with all that money right now. And a lot of the messaging is, it is so easy to change those beneficiaries. All you got to do is log onto your account and you decide, I don't want to include this organization anymore. Even if you do have a plan that is to just distribute all these funds at the end of my life to these charities, which is what we would like them to do, they can just get online and 2 seconds later change it. And they're encouraged to do that. They're encouraged to look at that on a regular basis, which, you know, of course, you should always look at your plans. But it is really, really easy. And so how does that play into our sort of benchmarking and our understanding of like our future revenue stream, or how we message around that? One of the challenges a lot of organizations have is they're not telling us. Like, we get these gifts when they die, but they never told us while they were alive. Well, again, our research project showed that about 20% of people are telling charities. So you don't even have, first of all, you don't even know most of the time who's putting you in and who's taking you out from a will, an estate plan, a donor advised fund succession plan. That's another problem. And that's another messaging and trust problem. But you know, we also make these assumptions that once you're in someone's plan, you don't often get taken out. Well, this makes it so easy, and they don't have to update their estate plan to do it. So I think, again, I always try to think, well, what does this mean for what we're asking our donors to do or share with us? What's our messaging around that? And yeah, I mean, what does this mean for stewardship? What does it mean for when we're asking people to let us know that you've put us in your estate plan? Do they know that to mean donor advised fund and succession plan as well, or not? Do we need to actually really clarify this? And again, know who the DAF donors are. And, you know, we're working on surveys to DAF donors specifically about this. You know, what does it mean when we say, oh, we're going to do a lead generation survey? We have all these people who'd consider a gift in their estate plans. What does that even mean? You know, it's, what does conversion mean? Okay, I've named you in my succession plan, but I could log on right after we get off this phone call and change it. So that's, you know, just some things that we have to think in terms of our own sort of KPIs, in terms of how we're looking ahead and planning and how we message around it. And again, all of this is imminently messageable, you know, but it is important to understand what is going on so that we can message it appropriately and potentially really better the relationship that we have with people by speaking to them in the language that they know, right?
Tracy, quick. Oh, you're going into messaging. That's what I was going to ask you. Is there like a baseline conclusion to all of this? Because like I see we could do a million different things.
Yes, there is.
But I mean, is like the baseline just to invest more in stewardship and you know, and then things will take care of themselves if you do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's some operational things you can do that everyone should be doing and often are not. So make it really easy. So we incentivize cash and income giving, right?
Okay.
So one is get some appends going, figure out who your DAF donors are, and, you know, send appeals to them that ask them to give from their DAF. Make it easy. You know, I think you had the folks from Chariot on a couple weeks ago. They're one of the first organizations that I've seen that are actually trying to make this a reasonable payment option, not a link to your donor advised fund, not a DAF direct widget, not something like that, but an actual, you know, credit card, Venmo, DAF, button on your donate form and on your appeals, as they're the only ones right now. Presumably there will be others, but as that option or those other options become integrated with your digital CRM and payment processor, like right now, we're building it into donate pages for our accounts who have Luminate. And I know they're working on one with Every Action and so on, because then it becomes a payment option just like a credit card. And if you have a donor who has a donor advised fund, and they're like, great, this was a great appeal, I'm going to hit donate. They've got their credit card to hand, but oh, well, I guess I could do a donor. Well, I got to log off and then I've got to go log on and it takes me away. Or maybe there's a link on the bottom of this page to another page on the website that talks about the DAF direct or something, and you've lost them. Like,
that is a problem. You lose people.
You've lost them, and you've also lost all the data. So you don't know if they made the gift. It doesn't go into your CRM. So as that option becomes available, we're going to be integrating it more and more. On direct mail remits, we're having a checkbox like, I'm going to use my donor advised fund at Vanguard to make this gift, and making sure the tax ID number is there. Right. I tell people to avoid like the DAF Direct. There's 3 donor advised funds that are attached to that. I also don't like those widgets in general. And I really don't like going through third-party plan giving vendors. So some of these widgets are integrated with like plan giving websites or some of the online will writing products and so on. Do not do that.
Okay. Why?
Well, one, because you're losing access to your data. You're forcing people to, for some of them, to open accounts with these vendors in order to do it when they don't have to. And a lot of times you can actually get this integrated directly with, so if you're going through a vendor like that, you can't integrate it onto your donate page. You can't integrate it into your forms. And so again, you're still adding in a whole lot of friction and extra steps. So ultimately the goal should be, however possible, to have it as a payment option versus a giving option, if that makes sense. Right?
Okay.
And to keep it, and again, I really think this stuff needs to get out of the plan giving products, and because that just keeps it less integrated. And yeah, I mean, some of the bigger stuff is like more financial transparency, build better relationships with our donors. This stuff is kind of the easy stuff. Again, make it I have some examples here of how we'll put it on a remit, or how we'll ask about a donor advised fund on a survey. Touch points, data axle, they do appends and models for DAF giving. So there's a bunch of sort of simple operational things you can put a little money into. The bigger things that you can do are going back to some of the basics of fundraising. I always say that fundraising is like good manners, right? That's really what it is. And so be better. Be better donor stewards, all donors, not just major donors, right? If I had a choice between hiring a gift officer and hiring a donor relations person who sat on the phone all day and called and said thank you and answered donor questions and sent notes, I would hire the donor relations persons in a minute, because that's going to have more long-term value right now. But also, you got to set realistic expectations. If you're a little tiny charity, are you going to have, you're not going to be able to do as much in terms of donor stewardship because you've got too many other things to do and too many pulls on your resources. And I'm not a big believer in, sort of, our agency is a big believer in community-centric fundraising, and I'm not a fan of putting donors up on a huge pedestal, but you can set those expectations actually with donors about what you can do and what you can't do. And you can still make information more easily available, whether it's on your website, whether it's figuring out how to get acknowledgements out faster. There are some things you can do. And some of my smaller charities I work with actually are way better at this than some of the bigger ones. And, it's just, we've got to build back the trust. So ultimately, it's like, know who they are, make it easy for them to give, build back trust with them, understand how these are impacting our fundraising programs, and understand how we need to change our messages and our workflows and like our KPIs. Again, I think the ship has sailed, but do make it easier to accept appreciated assets. Again, I think Charitable Solutions, I've worked with them on multiple gifts and they're really great. They'll also do things like they have the Gift Annuity Foundation. I really hate gift annuities, and I always encourage people not to start a gift annuity fund if they don't have one already. But if you have a donor who wants to do a gift annuity, they can actually do one through the Gift Annuity Foundation that Charitable Solutions is part of, and that way you don't have to have that whole program. So that's just, there's some interesting things now that you can do. And I think the big primary one is stop like fighting over donors and crediting and who owns this donor and all of that. This is one of the reasons that DAF giving has stayed in silos, because everyone fights over the donors and gift. Well, I don't get credit if I don't do this, or if I don't, what does it even mean to document an estate gift anymore if you're named as sort of in the succession plan? They're not a copy of the succession plan. So does that mean that it doesn't count in terms of your KPIs? I've seen this increasingly. So it's, yeah.
Some of it is common sense.
I always ignored crediting.
Yep. Some of it feels like common sense, but other parts feel more complicated. This has been incredible, Tracy. I'm grateful to everybody. If we have people who joined the Facebook contingent because LinkedIn broke, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to address them in the next couple of minutes. And if not, Tracy, we'll rebroadcast this on LinkedIn. And I'd like to ask you, what's the best way for people to be in touch with you if they have questions? Maybe they want to go a little bit deeper about this.
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Topic with you.
So friend me on LinkedIn, send me a message, probably the fastest way. I always put my slide decks on my profile there, so anyone can access them and send me a message. And yeah, I'm easy to find.
Awesome. So contact Tracy, highly recommend it. Katie has a question for us, for you, in fact, about payment options. You suggested offering DAFs as a payment option, not a giving option, and that would make it easy to give. How do we do that for people that maybe didn't join that interview we had a couple of weeks ago with the people from Chariot? Please give us the lay of the land here.
Yeah. So right now, Chariot is the only vendor I know that is creating that kind of payment option where it is another payment button on your donate page, just like Venmo or Apple Pay or PayPal or credit card. Now, in direct marketing, we test forms and donate pages forever before we make a change. And so we're in the middle of figuring that out right now, but ultimately we will figure out how to do it without tanking any response, which I don't think it will, because it is absolutely imperative. If someone has a DAF and they want to make a gift right then in response to your email or your campaign, they're going to do a credit card. The thing, and so what I liked about Chariot, and again, I don't generally endorse companies, right? Just because as a general rule, things change, but we are testing this. And what is very cool about it is the donor psychology involved. So if someone hits that, I'm gonna give with my DAF, and you get a little pop-up, normally, you put your credit card number in, here you just quickly log into your account. It does not take you over to your DAF account. It sets up an API to access your account. And all you see is, this is my account balance, and this is how much I'm going to give. And the thing is, if you were planning to make like a $100 gift, but you see that you've got $75,000 in your DAF account, you're going to make a bigger gift. That's just the way it is, because you see that money there and you're like, oh gosh, my $100 seems a little minimal. And maybe if I'm thinking about my credit card balance, yeah, but this money is sitting here. And so as a rule, they're seeing that those gifts are much, much bigger. They also are processed as a payment. They're right in your CRM. You know who made them immediately. You don't have to wait and see. Maybe a gift shows up like a month from now, and maybe they've put the name on it, or maybe they haven't. But especially if you're doing now, DAF donors really like emergency appeals. And so I work with international charities, and if like something else happens in Ukraine, or there's an earthquake or something, being able to get an email out with that link to DAF donors and say, support our recovery efforts in Ukraine right now. And knowing how much money came in, because you have to use it right then, is actually really cool. Now, I wouldn't suggest saying like, if you can get Chariot, even if it's not integrated yet. into your, whether, like I said, every action, I think they're just finishing that up. Illuminate, there's into the market there, right? But I will say, especially if you're using Gift Chariot, see if you can use it directly. They have partnerships with some different vendors, but if you have that ability to integrate it into your forms and your pages directly and not through a vendor, do it that way, because otherwise you lose a lot of those benefits. So thank you. Amanda,
Well, thank you for
the link up there. So
Amanda, very helpful. Thank you so much. Well, everybody, this was absolutely great. Tracy, we learned a whole bunch from you, as always. For everybody who joined, maybe hasn't been connected to the Donor Participation Project, I'll pop up the link here. It's a great group of people. You actually might sit in a room, in a virtual room, but with somebody like Tracy. So like super high quality people. And we chat about a lot of the nitty gritty of fundraising. Does that feel like a good summary?
Yeah. And you know what? If Amanda, if you're still on this call and you want to put my email address into that chat, she's one of my clients I work with. That would be great because I can't do it. But anyone can email me directly too. Or again, right through LinkedIn is fine.
Awesome. Everybody, let's collapse Tracy's inbox. Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.